Have you ever inherited something from a family member that you wish you could keep buried? Tonight, on Cellar Door, we explore what happens when one man uncovers the secrets beneath the land and discovers something has been waiting for him. If you enjoy immersive supernatural stories and haunting first-person horror tales, please hit the like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. I hadn't planned on coming back. Not for the farm, not for the house, and certainly not for the root cellar behind the barn. But when my father passed in January and the lawyer read his will, the kind scribbled in ink on a yellowed scrap of legal pad paper, I found myself standing in the snow-packed driveway of the home I once swore I'd never return to. Vermont winters are cruel that way. They don't wait for you to be ready. The place hadn't changed much. The wood siding was bleached and bowed, but it still stood. Same storm-battered tin roof. Same leaning red barn with its white crosshatch doors. And out back, right where I remembered, the old root cellar. Sealed shut. That was the first thing I checked. I must have been 8 or 9 the last time I saw it open. Dad had dragged me by the wrist through the snow, his face wild-eyed, whispering things I didn't understand. I just remember the look on his face when he shut the cellar door, like he was sealing away a rabid dog or worse. He nailed it shut, then chained it, then piled cinder blocks in front. "Don't ever go near it again," he said. "If it opens, leave." He didn't yell. That would have been easier to forget. He said it like he was handing me a truth older than both of us. I always thought he was a little cracked. A veteran, sure, but not from war, from something closer to home. He used to talk to himself late at night, muttering, sometimes praying. He'd walk the house with a shotgun he never fired. But here I was, back in it, with his ashes in a box on the kitchen counter and the keys to everything in my coat pocket. My name is Daniel Holt. I'm 47 years old. Divorced, no kids, former carpenter turned insurance adjuster. And for the next 3 months, I had taken unpaid leave to deal with the last thing my father ever gave me, 22 acres of silent, frostbitten land, and something sealed beneath it. The first night was quiet enough. I stayed in the farmhouse. Electricity was long gone, so I lit the fireplace and used the battery-powered lantern I'd brought with me. My breath smoked indoors. The wooden floors popped with the cold. I found a bottle of my father's old rye behind the kitchen wall panel, still half full. I poured a glass and sat in his recliner, which smelled like mothballs and pipe tobacco. There were no photographs in the house, no pictures of Mom, not even me, just a blankness. A preserved stillness. At 2:37 a.m., I woke up gasping. There was no dream, no noise, just this sudden, crushing feeling that I wasn't alone. I sat up, heart pounding, my mouth dry. I grabbed the flashlight. The house was empty, of course. Every room just as cold and abandoned as it had been the day before. But I couldn't shake it. That sense, like something had been leaning over me. When morning came, I walked out behind the barn. The root cellar had shifted. The cinder blocks were still there, but one had fallen over. The planks nailed across the door were loose, not broken, just crooked, like someone had pressed gently from the inside. A single nail lay half buried in the snow. And the chain, it had slack, just a little. But enough to notice. I stood there for a long time, staring at that door, not touching it, not going closer. It had been sealed for over 30 years. I told myself it was the thaw, the ground shifting, freeze and unfreeze. That happens in Vermont, heaving the land just enough to move a stone or a fence post. But that day, I didn't work. I just watched it from the kitchen window. By dusk, the wind picked up. The sky turned a deep violet. I could hear the barn's metal roof creaking, the snow hissing through the trees. And underneath it all, I swear, something softer, a sound like wet cloth being dragged across stone. That night, I put a chair under the front door and moved my flashlight closer to the cot. I didn't drink. I didn't sleep much. Either at 3:11 a.m., there was a noise that a sharp, quick rattle, like a chain being tugged once that I didn't go outside. Day 2. The root cellar was open, just an inch, maybe 2. The chain still on, but looser now, sagging like dead weight. The boards pulled farther apart. There were no footprints in the snow, no animal tracks, just a long scratch on the wooden threshold, like a fingernail dragging upward. I should have left. I thought about it, but I couldn't shake the image of my father, 30 years younger, hammering the door shut with sweat pouring from his temples. How his hands shook. How he wouldn't let me speak about it afterward. This wasn't just superstition. Something happened here. And if it had waited this long to be noticed again, I needed to know why. I took the old pry bar from the barn that afternoon and removed the top layer of planks, not all, just enough to reinforce the chain again and add new nails. I didn't look inside. I told myself it was just age and rot and maybe a raccoon. That night, I slept with the shotgun beside me. No dreams, just the sound of wind and something slower, closer, breathing under the floor. By the third morning, I'd stopped pretending I had an explanation. The root cellar was open, wider this time. The chain had uncoiled further, and one of the newer nails I'd driven in had snapped clean in half, bent outward from the inside. Snow had blown in just past the threshold, but there were no tracks, nothing that showed in the frost. Just a lingering dampness on the steps below, like someone had come up dripping wet. I didn't go closer. I didn't even speak. I stood there, holding my breath, and felt something very old stir in my chest. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. That day, I didn't try to fix the door. I went back inside and started searching the house. There had to be more than just memories of a paranoid father and a locked cellar. I combed through every drawer, every cabinet, the crawl space, the attic, the barn loft. Most of it was junk, rusted tools, old clothes, tax records from the 70s, but in a false panel behind the fireplace, I found a wrapped bundle of canvas. Inside was my father's journal. It wasn't long. The pages were thick, brittle with age. Most were scribbled with dates and weather notations, like a farmer's almanac. But as I flipped toward the back, the writing changed. The pen dug deeper. The letters trembled. March 3rd, 1936. Heavy snow. 3 calves stillborn. Ezra went into the woods again. Came back speaking in tongues. March 5. He won't eat. He only drinks milk, but vomits after. Sleeps under the floor. Preacher says it's the fasting, that it's near. We buried the well. March 7. The chanting doesn't stop. Mama can't sleep. I nailed the trap door shut. The thing below is not my brother anymore. I read it twice, then a third time. Ezra, my uncle, a name I'd heard once, maybe in a family story or two, always vague, whispered. Didn't make it through the Dust Bowl, Dad once said. But here he was, half mad, drinking milk like a starving cat, whispering in a language no one could name. And the line that haunted me most, the thing below is not my brother anymore. I don't know what I expected the cellar to be: mold, bones, rot, but I didn't expect that. A name, a connection, a piece of history so tightly bound to the land it had been literally sealed beneath it. It was around then that the dreams began. The first one came as a flash. I was a child again, standing at the edge of the cellar in summer. The grass was dry, golden, swaying in a hot wind. I could hear something below, not words exactly, but the rhythm of speech. the shape of language distorted by dirt and wood and years. Then something reached out, not a hand, but a shadow of one, and gripped my ankle. I woke up screaming. There were scratch marks on the floor beside my bed. The next morning, the door was wide open. The chain lay in the snow, uncoiled in a perfect circle like a shed snake's skin. The boards hung loose, two fallen completely, and the wooden steps inside were visible now, descending into a darkness that looked thicker than shadow. Like wet smoke clinging to stone. I stood at the threshold, heart pounding, breath fogging in the cold. And for the first time, I heard it clearly. A voice, not loud, not angry, just patient, calling my name. Daniel. It came not from below, but through me. Like my bones were hollow reeds, and something played them like an old pipe organ. I dropped the flashlight. It bounced down the stairs and vanished into the dark. I slammed the door shut. I didn't sleep that night, not because I didn't want to, because the house wouldn't let me. Every creak, every shifting timber sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like whispering through cracks. And just past 3 a.m., the fireplace lit on its OWN.NO flame. Just heat. And then that smell, not wood smoke, but earth. Freshly turned, like someone had been digging beneath the floorboards. I moved back into the truck for the night. Locked the doors. Turned the engine on and off. I was too tired to think, but I didn't leave. You see, something had changed. This wasn't just fear anymore. It was curiosity. A horrible, aching need to know, to remember, to finish the story my father had started. I didn't feel like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was being brought back to it, like waking from a long, numb sleep. And that cellar, that door, was the center of it all. The next afternoon, I returned with bolt cutters, a crowbar, and a lantern. I didn't tell myself lies. I didn't make excuses. I just walked to the cellar, stepped over the broken boards, and opened it. It breathed, not literally, but as the door came up, I felt a rush of air, cold, moist, heavy with the scent of moss and iron and something older. Something wrong. The kind of air you find in deep caves where nothing should live. The stairs groaned beneath my boots. There were only 10 steps, but every one felt like descending into a different year. By the time I reached the bottom, I could no longer hear the wind, or the birds, or anything at all. The cellar wasn't very big, maybe 15 feet wide, 20 long. The walls were stone, mortared by hand, uneven. The floor was dirt, and along the far end, a bricked-over well. Old, cracked. Something was carved around its lip, but I couldn't make it out. Some kind of symbol, worn smooth by time. That's when I saw the salt. Lines of it, old and broken, traced in circles, spirals, sigils I didn't recognize. Much of it had been disturbed, time, water, rats, but parts remained. And at the center, a child's shoe. Just one dot too small to have been my father's, and far too new to be from the 1930s. Something was still here, not alive, not dead, not buried, but waiting, listening, whispering beneath the soil in a voice that matched my father's when he was young, and it knew my name. I didn't sleep after I went into the cellar. I didn't eat much either. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, my father's journal in front of me, a cold cup of coffee untouched at my elbow, and every light in the house burning. The storm had passed, but it hadn't warmed up. If anything, the cold had deepened, as if something from the ground had risen and blanketed the house with frost from the inside. The journal still smelled faintly of smoke and mildew. The leather binding was cracked, and the ink on the earlier pages had begun to fade, but tucked between the last two entries, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A folded sheet of paper. Onion skin thin, typed, yellowed with a GE.IT headed date at the top. March 8th, 1936. The heading read simply, Statement to Reverend Copeland. He is not Ezra anymore. He answers to it, but it's a trick, a mimicry. I saw it in his eyes, the color wrong, like curdled milk. It came from the forest, I think. One night he walked out there, said he heard the moon singing, came back barefoot, clothes torn, talking about a mouth under the field. The preacher said the old ways still fester in these woods, that Vermont is not Christian land beneath the surface, that the earth remembers older prayers. We sealed the well with salt and brick. We placed Ezra inside with a psalm on his tongue. But even then, the door wouldn't stay shut. That's when we began the binding. W. Harrow Sr. Reading it chilled me worse than the cellar ever did. There were no names beyond the Reverend. No official signatures. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. Left like a will, as if my grandfather knew the day would come when someone, maybe me, would have to decide whether to leave the door shut or open it again. I flipped the journal back to my father's final entries. The ones from the 60s, when I was just a boy. They were messier, less about facts and more about guilt. The handwriting jagged, inconsistent. He spoke to me again, from under the floor. I told him no, he couldn't come up. The cellar was frozen shut for years, but now it's warm again. The soil moves. Your mother asked me once why we don't use it for potatoes. I told her rats, but even rats avoid that place. Even they know. If it calls for you, son, if you ever hear it, you must not answer. No matter the voice it uses, no matter who it pretends to be. I leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, heart pounding, because I had heard it. Not just in the dreams, not just in the cellar, but now, when the wind died down, when the silence pressed in, I could hear my mother's voice humming a lullaby she never sang when she was alive. I could hear the floor creak in patterns that matched her footfalls when she'd check on me at night. I could hear Ezra calling my name from beneath the frozen earth like he had every right to it. I needed to know more. Not for curiosity anymore. Not even for survival. But because I could feel something shifting in me, a tilt in gravity, and if I didn't anchor myself in the truth, I'd slide all the way down into that cellar and never come back. I drove into town. It was a 30-minute drive to the Historical Society, and most of the way I kept one hand on the wheel and the other gripping the journal like a talisman. The building was empty except for a young woman at the desk. When I asked about Reverend Copeland, her eyes lit up.
Oh, the one from the Ezra Harrow incident? Yeah, that's kind of a local legend here. Some say he was a witch hunter, some say he was mad. We've got a whole file on him. Want me to pull it?
10 minutes later, she returned with a box. Inside, newspaper clippings, carbon-copied sermons, maps of the area from 1930 through 1940, and one black and white photo. It showed a man in a long coat standing beside a narrow stone well, hands raised in blessing or warning. His eyes were pale. His expression was grim. On the back of the photo, written in pencil,
He walked into the ground. We never saw him again.
Among the newspaper clippings was an article dated March 11th, 1936. Boy vanishes in wake of strange winter storm. Ezra Harrow, age 12, was reported missing after a series of unseasonal weather events. Local preacher Reverend John Copeland has refused comment, citing ongoing spiritual concerns. Neighbors claim to have heard chanting from the Harrow property. No remains were ever recovered. As I folded the article back, a final sheet caught my eye. It was typed, no date, but the ink matched the statement I found in the journal. The being below is not of this earth, though it wears the voice of those we love. It is bound by salt, by brick, and by ignorance. The more we know, the closer it comes. Do not teach your children its name. Do not speak to it. If it sings, bury your ears. If it begs, bury your heart. I returned home at dusk. The sun was setting behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the snow. The house looked smaller somehow, crooked. The angles not quite right, as if time had started to buckle the walls inward. And then I saw it. Footprints, small, bare, leading from the woods, not toward the house, toward the cellar. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just followed, because I knew whatever was down there wasn't done with me yet. The cellar door was open again. No footprints now. Just the door yawning wide at the base of the snow-blown hill, gaping like a wound that had never healed right. I stood at the top of the steps, breath fogging in the frigid air, lantern in one hand. The other wrapped tight around my father's journal. I wasn't just going down there. I was bringing the whole line of Harrows with me. And maybe, in some backwards way, that's what this thing wanted all along. The first few steps were numbingly familiar. The scent of rot and frozen soil. The wooden beams overhead bowed with age. But something had changed. The cold wasn't natural anymore. It had a weight to it. A wool.it pressed against my skin like fingers. I reached the bottom. The dirt floor was damp, glistening. The outline of the bricked-up well was unmistakable in the center, a perfect circle of age-darkened mortar and stone. The bricks were newer than everything else down here. Newer, but not intact. Point 2 had been pulled loose. As I stepped closer, I saw scratch marks on the surrounding dirt. Shallow trenches made by small hands or clawed ones. It didn't matter anymore. The thing inside was working its way up. I knelt beside the hole, shined the lantern down into the narrow GAP.NO light reached the bottom. But something was moving in the dark, shifting like wet silk. And then, without warning, a voice rose up from the black, not Ezra's, not even human. Something wrong trying to become right. Cold down here. Aren't you cold too, boy? So long I've waited for you. So long forgotten. Let me speak through you. Let me be home again. I didn't answer, but it didn't need words. It knew me, knew my family, knew how to bend the mind in ways that made you think you were in control, even when you'd already begun to sink. And then I heard my mother's voice again, but not just humming this time. She was whispering the words to the bedtime prayer she'd said when I was 5. Now I lay me down to sleep, but her voice cracked near the end. Not from emotion. From imitation. It couldn't get the pitch right. It was mimicking, not remembering. I backed away, heart pounding. Something else stirred. A shape, low to the ground, long-limbed, crawling out just far enough for light to catch the barest gleam of eyes. Pale, lidless. Watching. It wasn't Ezra anymore. I fled up the stairs, slammed the door shut behind me. This time, I didn't just bar it. I nailed it. I dragged the woodpile, old tractor tires, metal shelves, anything I could, and stacked it until the cellar was sealed behind a wall of scrap and stubborn grief. And still, beneath all of it, I could hear it scratching. I didn't sleep. Instead, I did what my father must have done 100 times before me. I wrote, not in a journal, but on full sheets of paper, leaving out nothing. The voices, the dreams, the thing that wears faces like winter coats, discarded when the season ends. Then I drove into town again, to the church, to the old preacher's archives. I needed to know what the binding was. What could possibly contain this thing if bricks and salt weren't enough? There was one mention. A ritual. Rural, syncretic, half-pagan, half-Christian. passed down through fringe groups in Vermont's northern hills. It was called the threefold circle. To contain a being not of this world, the rite must be performed by one of blood, on land where its first name was spoken, using items tied to love, memory, and death. I knew what I had to do. I came back just before dawn, the air so cold it cracked my lips. The house was silent, the snow untouched, but I knew it was waiting. I gathered 3 items: my mother's hairbrush, still wrapped in the tissue she kept at my father's journal, the final confession of a man who buried his brother alive, and a piece of Ezra's childhood blanket, dug from a box in the attic, brittle with age but still holding his initials in stitch thread. I made the circle in the snow, 3 loops, linked like a chain, each marked with one of the items. I in the center, a candle, black wax, and then I spoke. I didn't know the words exactly, but I let instinct guide me. My bloodline had been dancing around this thing for generations. Some part of me knew how to speak to it. You are not Ezra. You are not mine. You are not welcome. I bind you to the dark you came from, to the name you buried, to the mouth beneath the field. The wind howled. The ground beneath the cellar groaned. The snow turned to steam, and the thing below screamed. Not just with sound, with pressure. Like my ears were going to split. Like the inside of my skull had become a bell being rung from the inside out. But I held the circle. I didn't move, and slowly it began to fade. The candle went out, the wind stopped, and the cellar door stayed shut. That was 3 nights ago. I've been sleeping again, lightly, with the journal beside my bed. The snow hasn't melted, but it feels different now. The silence isn't watching anymore. Maybe it's over. But every so often, just past midnight, I hear footsteps on the back porch. They never try the door. They don't need to, because they're already inside the house. If you were in his shoes, would you dare open that door or leave the past sealed forever? Let me know in the comments. And if this story kept you up tonight, share it with a friend who loves a good dark folklore nightmare. Until next time, keep your cellar doors locked and your lantern lit.